"Do I know you? Are you a friend of my husband from his middle school days?" I asked, eyeing the stranger warily. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave right now," I insisted, my voice firm and resolute. "I'm Jackson," the man introduced himself, seemingly unaffected by my demand. "I'm 33 and currently single. Today marked the wedding day of my colleague Lucas, who also happened to be a close friend." As I mingled with guests, a man who claimed to be a relative of Bryce, the groom, approached me and ushered me towards a waiting area just before the ceremony. Physically imposing and with a firm grip, the man guided me forcefully with his strong arms, leaving me feeling uneasy about his intentions. Thinking that perhaps the bride wanted to extend a pre-ceremony greeting, I followed the relative, assuming goodwill. Initially, I admired her apparent courtesy, but that admiration swiftly soured. It became evident that my presence was not welcomed for congenial purposes, but rather as a means of coercion. The bride, waiting in the anteroom, wore a malevolent expression that sent a shiver down my spine. Momentarily taken aback, I managed to compose myself and offered my congratulations. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Her response was abrupt and commanding. "You need to leave immediately," she ordered, leaving no room for argument. "What?" I blurted out in disbelief, unable to contain my reaction to the bride's statement. Her response to my question was exasperatingly patronizing. "This is precisely why dealing with uneducated individuals is such a hassle," she muttered under her breath, the disdain evident in her tone. It was clear that the bride harbored disdain for my educational background, or rather, the lack thereof. She didn't mince her words as she elaborated. "Allow me to clarify. My husband and I hail from esteemed lineage, and today's guests belong to the elite echelons of society. Your presence as a mere high school graduate is jarring and distasteful to me." The implications were not lost on me. My educational background had become a source of embarrassment in their esteemed circles. Naturally, I was aware of Lucas' prestigious background and the disdain some harbor towards those without extensive academic credentials. It wasn't a new experience for me. I'd encountered similar attitudes before. Despite this, my bond with Lucas transcended such superficial judgments, prompting me to attend his wedding. My sole intention was to partake in the joyous occasion and celebrate my friend's union. However, the bride's blatant disdain towards me, a guest she deemed unworthy, cast a shadow over the festivities. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I inquired if I could offer Lucas a few words of congratulation before taking my leave. The reaction from the bride and her relatives was immediate and explosive. Feeling overwhelmed by the tension and animosity, I couldn't help but mutter, "This is all a bit too much for me." Confused by their laughter in what seemed like a serious moment, I dared to inquire about the reason behind their amusement. The bride's response stunned me beyond belief. "My husband didn't invite you here out of friendship, but rather out of pity," she declared matter-of-factly. As she continued, the pieces of an unexpected puzzle started to fall into place. Despite my bewilderment, she proceeded, delving into the depths of my troubled past, one marked by parental abandonment and a childhood spent in the confines of an orphanage. She went on to explain how my struggles with malnutrition had left a lasting impact, evident in my tall yet slender frame even into adulthood. The revelation left me speechless, realizing that Lucas's invitation to his wedding was not an act of camaraderie, but rather an expression of empathy towards a former classmate enduring ongoing hardship. The bride jumped to a startling conclusion, assuming Lucas's invitation was an attempt to provide me with a meal at the wedding. I tried to reason with her, explaining the impossibility of such a scenario, but my protest fell on deaf ears. In a tone laced with disdain, she proceeded to belittle my worth, emphasizing the stark disparity between Lucas's accomplishments and mine. According to her, Lucas's compassion could potentially elevate his status, but she couldn't fathom allowing someone with only a middle school education to attend her wedding. She highlighted Lucas's prestigious academic background and successful career, contrasting it sharply with my own humble position as a janitor or security guard in the same company. The bride's words stung with contempt as she dismissed any notion of Lucas feeling sorry for me simply because we were former classmates. To her, the idea was preposterous, bordering on outrageous. We're both employed by the same company, one that's recently entered the public domain and shows considerable promise. It's a sought-after workplace, topping the charts for job seekers. Our company policy prioritizes talent acquisition, meaning individuals deemed valuable can join regardless of academic background. Despite the company's prestige, I acknowledge the disparity between a junior high school graduate like myself and a college-educated colleague. Yet, regardless of the motives behind Lucas's invitation, I simply wish to extend my congratulations. I harbored no expectations in return. However, earnestly articulate my sentiments and plead my case, the bride remains resolutely unyielding. Her gaze is consistently cold, as though regarding something unsavory. It's as if she's reluctant to even share the same airspace with me. She dismisses my heartfelt expressions of friendship with disdainful indifference. Are you trying to cozy up to my husband and snag a job with just a junior high school diploma? Her words were just a rejection of my presence at their wedding. They hinted at potential repercussions in the workplace. Caught off guard, I struggled to find a response. Despite the company's acceptance of individuals with minimal education, I couldn't bring myself to accept such condescension, especially from the spouse of my colleague. Suddenly, a male relative's actions escalated the tension further. Ignoring my protests, he forcibly grabbed at me, his actions invasive and aggressive. Attempting to fend him off, I reached for his arm, but he forcefully pushed me against the wall. A sharp pain shot through my back and chest, eliciting a low, guttural growl of pain. Enough, just leave, the relative barked before completing its sentence, abruptly opening the door to the waiting room. I was unceremoniously ejected, landing on the floor with a resounding thud. Despite the rough treatment, I resolved to carry on without offering my congratulations to Lucas. Preferring not to risk being barred from the wedding altogether, I sought refuge in a nearby cafe, biding my time before rejoining the festivities with the other guests. As the wedding reception commenced, I settled into my seat, hoping to blend in unnoticed. However, the bride's penetrating gaze soon found me. Without uttering a word, her lips moved silently, forming a single question directed at me. "What are you doing here?" The bride's expression shifted as the relative man spotted me. With determination, he lunged towards me, seizing my arm in an attempt to forcibly remove me. However, this time, I wasn't going to be ejected so easily. Nearby attendees sprang to action, rallying around me, shielding me from the relative's grasp. Panic flashed across the relative's face as he struggled to comprehend the situation. Sensing the urgency, the bride seemed equally flustered. Seizing the moment, I grabbed hold of a nearby microphone and addressed the bride, who remained bewildered by the unfolding events. "Bride, I owe you an apology for my earlier words. My desire to witness Lucas's wedding led me here today," I declared loudly, ensuring my message reached her despite the chaos surrounding us. Lucas, seated at the head table, overheard our exchange and interjected with confusion and concern. "What's happening here? What's all this about?" he demanded. The bride, visibly shaken by Lucas's unexpected intrusion, responded in a tremulous voice, "It's nothing, just go back to your seat, Lucas." With a hint of desperation, she added, "I asked Jackson to leave because he only has a junior high school education. It wouldn't be a good match for us, Lucas." Feeling a sense of resignation, I addressed the bride, who appeared lost in her own distress. "I apologize for any inconvenience I've caused. If it's what you desire, I'll sever all professional ties with Lucas. Please forgive me for any disruption I've caused." A hush descended over the entire hall as my declaration hung in the air. The bride was the first to break the silence. "What? Fired? What's going on?" Lucas's voice quivered with confusion. "You? What did you just say?" Recognition dawned on Jackson's face as he processed my words. "That's correct. I am Jackson, the president of our company," I affirmed, my tone steady. "I may have only graduated from junior high school, but I founded a delivery company at the age of 16. With nothing but a bicycle, I transformed it into a major corporation over the span of a decade. And in response to changing consumer habits, we swiftly transitioned into a publicly traded entity. Lucas wasn't just a friend to me, he was a lifeline, a source of unwavering support when I needed it most. He shared his meals with me, showing kindness and compassion during times when I struggled with malnutrition. Raised in an orphanage until the age of 15, I lacked the familial stability that Lucas enjoyed from the age of 12, when he was adopted by his current parents. Despite our different upbringings, Lucas and I remained close even after our paths diverged geographically. When we embarked on the journey of entrepreneurship together, Lucas vowed to dedicate himself to our shared vision. Witnessing his transformation from a shy individual to a confident groom filled me with immense joy. My determination to congratulate Lucas stemmed from a deep-rooted friendship and gratitude. I remained steadfast even in the face of the bride's objections. Unbeknownst to me, the bride's disdain stemmed from my educational background, yet I was unaware that being a junior high school graduate didn't preclude me from holding a significant position within our company. The authority to terminate employees rested with me, a fact that the bride herself had acknowledged when she requested I sever ties with Lucas. I gently assured her that I had complied with her wishes. In response, she uttered a cold remark, confirming Lucas's termination. The bride, previously frozen in shock, muttered disdainfully, "Fired? If you're such a failure, I have no use for you." Without hesitation, she renounced the marriage entirely, citing my lack of elite status and high income as deal breakers. It was a startling turn of events as she promptly called off the engagement with Lucas, who had just been dismissed from his job. The attendees erupted in uproar at her abrupt declaration. Amidst the chaos, any semblance of our previously amicable relationship vanished. Accusations flew as she labeled the situation a marriage scam, demanding compensation from Lucas for the broken engagement. Lucas's revulsion was palpable in the midst of the chaos. Quietly, I reached out and tapped the bride on the shoulder as she continued to raise her voice. Leaning in, I whispered, "You might want to start saving up for alimony payments." With that, I initiated a video playback on the projector, revealing footage captured by a phone I had strategically left recording in the bride's waiting room. The recording, inadvertently triggered when a male relative manhandled me, potentially held crucial evidence of my injury. As I was pushed against the wall, the phone fell, continuing to record. What it captured was damning. The bride's indiscretion with the same male relative in the waiting room. As the ceremony commenced, I retraced my steps to the waiting room in search of the phone I suspected I had dropped. To my relief, I discovered it nestled in a corner, untouched. However, the shock of what I witnessed upon playing back the recording left me reeling. Witnessing such deceitful behavior on what should have been a sacred occasion shook me to the core. It was difficult to comprehend how anyone could stoop to such lows. Driven by a sense of moral obligation, I immediately sought out Lucas to disclose the damning evidence. The revelation of the bride's true nature sparked a fiery reaction from Lucas's relatives, who unleashed their fury upon the bride's family. In response, the bride's relatives vehemently denied any association with the man implicated in the recording. They adamantly refused to acknowledge any connection to him. It later emerged that the man accompanying the bride was nothing more than an unfaithful partner. Despite his charming demeanor, he was essentially a freeloader, lacking any meaningful employment. The bride, yearning for a life of prestige and sophistication within an educated family, sought to elevate her status by securing a marriage with Lucas, a gentle and unassuming man. Her intentions were revealed to be far from genuine, painting her in a negative light. In contrast, Lucas, dedicated to his studies and somewhat naive in matters of love, possessed a trusting nature that left him vulnerable to manipulation. Ultimately, I'm grateful that my humble education allowed me to see through the deceitful intentions of those involved. Never did I anticipate that my educational background would prove valuable in such a manner. The deceitful bride faced the consequences of her actions, being ordered to pay a hefty sum of $5 million for wedding expenses and an additional $3 million for terminating the engagement, accumulating the staggering debt of $8 million. As a result of the humiliation she endured, she found herself isolated from her family. Her unfaithful partner, alarmed by the overwhelming debt, fled the scene, leaving her to face the repercussions alone. With her once inviolable life now in shambles, the bride was forced into a solitary existence, residing in a rundown apartment and toiling tirelessly day and night in a desperate attempt to repay her debts. The arrival of the deceitful woman inadvertently strengthened the bond between Lucas and me, fostering a deeper friendship as we navigated through the ordeal. Meanwhile, our company experienced a period of rapid and steady growth. Observing Lucas's enduring desire for marriage, I contemplated accompanying him to a matchmaking event in the future.
"I don't like anything about you, Mother," said my eldest son's wife. "We want to live with our family alone, so get out." I was shocked to hear these words. It reminded me of when I had to leave my own parents' home. Now, I felt angry at the idea of being kicked out of this house too. "Fine, I'll leave," I said, gathering my things to go. This was too much. I was determined never to forgive my eldest son's wife. It was time to put my plan into action. So, my name is Sandra Clark, and I'm 61 years old this year. I'm technically retired, but I'm still lucky enough to have some work. I don't go to the office every day anymore. Sometimes I drop by and attend meetings, but mostly I work from home. My oldest son seems to think I'm not working anymore, which isn't true. I became a widow when I was in my 40s. Right now, I live with my oldest son and his wife. Our family home has been in our family for a long time. It's a bit old and needs some fixing up, but I've always loved it. That's why leaving was hard. I've never had to worry much about money. My late husband's insurance money is still mostly untouched. I've been able to live comfortably without worrying about my future. Even though it might seem like I have an easy life, there are some things that bother me. It's mostly my oldest son's wife, Jessica. She's strong-willed and we often clash. This tension didn't just start recently. It goes back to when she first told us they were getting married. I still remember the outfit she wore when she first came to meet us. She showed up in a tracksuit that looked like something she wore back in high school. She said she wanted to be real with us, but I couldn't help but find it a bit odd. It's not exactly lying, but it felt like she was trying too hard to prove something. She's also very argumentative and smart, which can be challenging. I couldn't understand why my oldest son chose her as his partner. Later, I found out that Jessica was the one who pursued him. She's bold, I'll give her that, and she's attractive too. I think my son, who's a bit naive and sheltered, fell for her charm. Even after they decided to marry, things didn't change much. To put it nicely, she's straightforward. To be blunt, sometimes she lacks common sense in how she acts. I really wanted to object to their marriage, but I reminded myself that it's what my son wanted, so I kept my peace. And now, we're facing the consequences of that decision. After my son and Jessica got married, he insisted that we all live together in our family home. I thought Jessica might disagree, but she was actually okay with the idea. It didn't take long for me to understand why. However, once we started living together, Jessica never lifted a finger to help with household chores. She left everything for me to do, cleaning, laundry, cooking, despite being a full-time housewife herself. She had quit her job when they got married. Even though I work remotely and don't have to go to the office every day, I still have less free time than Jessica. While I'm working on my computer, Jessica would make comments belittling my work, saying I'm just goofing off. At first, I brushed it off to avoid arguments, but it bothered me more and more as it kept happening. Jessica, since you have some free time, could you help out with the cleaning? I asked, noticing her lounging and watching TV. She looked at me with disgust, sighed dramatically, and replied, I don't do housework for your own good, mother. Can't you see that? It's a shame you don't appreciate my consideration. She had this strange theory where she believed if she did the housework, it would be bad for my health. According to her, seniors need to stay active, and doing chores would make me sedentary and possibly lead to dementia. So she was actually doing me a favor by letting me handle everything. Her reasoning was so bizarre it gave me a headache. Then she said something even more shocking. I agreed to live together to keep you from slacking off, mother. She said it with a half smile, leaving me speechless. I regretted agreeing to live together more and more every day. Doing all the housework while being watched by Jessica was nothing but torture. Fed up with the situation, I decided to talk to my eldest son, but it wasn't to complain about Jessica. I decided to move to an apartment where I could live alone. The current house we're in is old and has many stairs, which became difficult for me after I hurt my back last year. I talked to my son about the challenges of living here, and then I moved to an apartment. Even though it felt like Jessica pushed me out, I don't regret leaving. The new apartment is a rental. It might be a bit big for just me, but I got a room big enough for my grandchildren to stay in the future. I had the inside designed just the way I like it, and it felt like my own little castle. But my happiness didn't last long because Jessica started coming over every day and staying until late. The new apartment is really nice, huh? Maybe too big for you, Mom? Jessica said, lounging on the couch. Why don't you come back to your old home and do the chores? It's for your health and longevity. It's unbelievable that Jessica is telling me to go back to the old house and do the chores. During the day, she's so self-centered, it's overwhelming. I've already moved out. You need to take responsibility as the wife. I handle all the chores here, and my health checkups are always fine, Jessica. You don't need to worry about me. But Jessica just turned away, ignoring my words. Ignoring anything inconvenient was her usual tactic. Yet, she kept coming to my apartment every day. Just recently, she said it's too much trouble to go back home and ended up spending the night. My parents' house and this apartment are only about a 15-minute walk apart. It was my eldest son who suggested I live closer to my parents' house because he was concerned. His concern made me a little sad to leave the old house. One day, after I had been out for work-related errands, I came back in the evening to a surprise. To my shock, Jessica had let herself into my apartment. It seemed she used the spare key I had given to my son without my knowledge. Welcome back, she said, lying on the floor in front of the TV without even bothering to get up. Jessica, that spare key is for emergencies only, not for you to come in whenever I'm not home. I felt uneasy knowing she had been in my apartment while I was away. It was the first time I firmly told her so. She seemed surprised, as I usually let things slide quickly. She gave me an annoyed look, but I stood my ground. You really are a difficult mother-in-law. I can't stand that about you. Jessica started yelling at me. I can't stand anything about you, not even this apartment. We're a family, so you should leave. With that, she tried to push me out the door. It seemed Jessica couldn't bear the idea of me living in the apartment. She was upset that they were still in the old house while I was here, calling it unfair. James is paying the rent for this place, right? It wouldn't be strange for us, his family, to live here. That's what it means to live beyond your means. Jessica seemed to think my son was covering the rent for the apartment. This explained why she kept showing up here. In her mind, the apartment should have been for her family to live in. Fine, I'll leave, I said firmly, staring her down. I agreed to move out within 3 days, which seemed to surprise her. Right in front of her, I called a moving company and arranged for them to come in 2 days. As Jessica left feeling satisfied, I watched her go, already planning my next move. True to my word, I moved out. My new place was an apartment specifically designed for seniors. I decided to test it out for 2 weeks. I handed over the keys and lease documents to Jessica, asking for a change in the contract through the real estate agent to the landlord. Luckily, I've known the landlord for a long time, so they were flexible and accommodating, which was a relief. My eldest son was furious with Jessica for kicking me out. He's even considering divorce, but Jessica doesn't seem to care. In fact, she started living alone in my apartment, saying, "Well then, let's live separately." I'm amazed at how bold she is. But in 5 days, Jessica will find out the truth. While I was working from home, my phone started ringing incessantly. It was Jessica calling. I had been expecting this, so I had a recorder ready to record the conversation. I pressed the record button and answered the call. "Excuse me, Mother, what's the deal with the rent for this apartment? Why do I have to pay it?" Jessica started ranting as soon as I picked up the phone. She sounded flustered. "Well, Jessica, you're the current leaseholder, so it's only fair that you pay. Is there a problem?" I purposely kept my tone calm and relaxed to annoy Jessica. She seemed even more agitated but didn't back down. "But didn't James used to pay the rent here? We're not even divorced yet, so shouldn't James pay?" Jessica had told my eldest son about the rent issue and he advised her to call me. The truth was, my son had never paid the rent. In fact, I had been financially supporting him. After retiring, I continued working as a consultant and advisor, earning a good salary. I was actually earning more than my son. I had been secretly helping him out because Jessica tended to spend a lot. "It's just a misunderstanding, Jessica. Originally, I was the one paying the rent for that place. I never made James pay a dime." Jessica seemed shocked and caught off guard by the truth. She quickly said what she wanted to and hung up the phone. Right away, I contacted my eldest son and played him the recorded conversation. "I've been putting up with it too, but I can't take it anymore. You feel the same way, don't you?" I knew my son was exhausted from dealing with Jessica's debts. No matter how old he gets, as a parent, I can't help but want to help him out. Some might say I'm too soft, but I think it's just natural as a parent. My son replied quietly, "I'll divorce her, I'm tired too." Then follow my lead. I told him my plan and gave him instructions. First, I asked him to take a few days of paid leave starting today. Then, I told him to quietly move out his important belongings without letting Jessica know. We didn't want her to notice any moving trucks, as she might be nearby. I had instructed him to slowly move his things out during the night, keeping it discreet. The important belongings were taken to a single-family home that I had found as our new residence. This way, the plan progressed without Jessica knowing. 3 days later, Jessica called again, sounding even more flustered than before. What? Why are you so worked up? Just like last time. I kept my tone deliberately relaxed as Jessica sounded overly anxious, almost in a state of panic. Mother, our house is up for sale. And I got a call from my parents saying that my belongings have arrived at their house. What does that mean? Jessica explained that her parents had received her belongings and our old house was now on the market. It seemed my eldest son had followed my instructions. He had sent Jessica's things to her parents' house and put our old house up for sale, leaving it empty. The landlord told me that if I can't pay the rent, I should leave. I thought I should consult with James, and when I got home, there were chains and a padlock on the gate, and I couldn't get in. There's even a for sale sign up. Jessica was almost hysterical. It must have been quite a shock for her to come home to. I've already entered into a sales contract with a realtor. We can't access that house anymore, Jessica had began, ready to express all the pent-up frustration. Firstly, I'm no longer your mother-in-law, right? Yesterday, James should have filed for divorce. You signed it, didn't you? You and I are strangers now. Yesterday, my eldest son had filed for divorce at the city office. It turns out Jessica had signed the papers a while ago. Threatening divorce seemed to be a tactic she often used. My son used to believe that Jessica would change someday. After all, she was the person he loved enough to marry. He felt trapped into giving in to her threats of divorce, he once told me. But it seems my son has finally realized the truth. He signed the divorce papers, which had always been used as leverage, and submitted them. The divorce has been officially processed. You always used to tell James that you could divorce anytime. Are you happy now that things have turned out your way, Jessica? I could sense Jessica holding her breath on the other end of the phone. She wanted to argue back but seemed lost for words. She must have been feeling frustrated. Besides, I'm worried about you. After the divorce, how will you manage to live in that apartment without a job? Moving also costs money, and it's tough. How did you even afford it? Jessica's anger was no longer hidden. She yelled and cursed at me. She had claimed she married my son because of the inheritance he received from my late husband. However, I control all the inheritance and she can't touch a penny of it. Despite marrying to clear debts, she screamed that nothing was going well for her. Of course, I made sure my son listened to this conversation too. If it came to a divorce settlement, I planned to use the recording as evidence. I thought it was the end, so I patiently waited for Jessica to finish her tantrum. She ranted for about 15 minutes without pause. Then, in the end, she started begging me for help, crying. She confessed that she had been disowned by her family. With nowhere else to go, she pleaded for my assistance. It suddenly clicked for me. Something had felt off at the wedding, and now I understood what it was. Jessica had no place to go, no home to return to. Despite feeling a bit sorry for her, I couldn't ignore the consequences of her actions. Apologizing now won't change anything. We're strangers now. There's nothing more to discuss. Good luck with your life from here on, I said before ending the call with Jessica. I felt a sense of relief afterward. It seems Jessica caused trouble at my eldest son's workplace. He told me things escalated to the point of involving the police when he returned home. Jessica, who had been staying at the apartment without paying rent, had her keys changed by the landlord while she was out. Now, she can't even get into her own apartment. She might have tried to contact me or my son, but we had canceled our phones and got new ones with new numbers. I can only imagine the despair she felt when she realized she couldn't reach us no matter how many times she tried. We didn't give her our new address either, so she can't reach us that way. After causing a scene at my son's company, she was issued a restraining order. With no other options, it seems Jessica turned to her disowned family for help. However, when she returned home, she was met with a shocking sight. The luggage I had sent to her family's house was left out in the rain in the backyard, and she wasn't even allowed inside the house. It's likely that the unpaid rent for the apartment had been billed to her parents, adding to their anger. I heard rumors that she's currently staying in an apartment provided by an organization that supports homeless people. Without the ability to spend as she did before, she seemed stressed when I passed her on the street. I was stunned to see how much her hair had turned white and how dry her skin looked. She had changed so much. I hardly recognized Jessica at first. It made me realize just how much a change in living conditions can affect a person. I've started a new life in the house I bought with my late husband's inheritance. It's a duplex, so my son can remarry whenever he wants. For now, he joins me for dinner, but otherwise, he takes care of his own things. I've found that this distance works well for us. The money from selling my parents' home is safe for future needs. I plan to use it for my son and his future wife when they marry. And of course, I'll keep some aside for any future grandchildren. I'm thinking of creating the English garden I've always dreamed of in my new home. On days when I'm not working, I spend time in the garden, caring for the young trees and herbs. This new life, filled with hope, has become my daily routine. My name is Lisa. I'm 35 years old and I work part-time. I live with my husband Mark and our daughter Emma. Mark works in an office, and Emma goes to first grade. We bought an old house and we still owe money for it. When Emma started school, I got a part-time job to help pay for the house. Mark's older sister Nancy got married before us. She lives with her dad, Mark's dad, in their family home. Nancy thinks she should have the house because she got married first. She says she'll take care of their dad, so she should get the house. Nancy's mom had already passed away when she got married, so she didn't need to take care of her dad at the time. The house where Mark's parents live is really big, and I remember being surprised when I saw it before we got married. It had a fancy gate and a lot of land around it, which made me wonder if Mark's parents were rich. When Mark and I were dating, he didn't seem very wealthy, so seeing his parents' big house was a shock. Mark said his family used to be rich, but they lost money over the years. He joked that even though his grandparents' house was big, it was old and not very comfortable to live in. He said it was amazing that his parents' house with its big piece of land was still in a nice neighborhood. I understand why Nancy, Mark's sister, wants to keep the house for herself. She kicked Mark out of the house if she could live there. She probably wants to own the land and house herself. But I don't know if Nancy actually owns the house now. When Mark and I got married, he said that since Nancy would take care of their dad, I wouldn't have to. We planned to let Nancy inherit the house. That's why we bought our own house. It might make their dad feel better to be taken care of by his daughter instead of me if he ever gets sick and needs help. When we go to visit Mark's family for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy doesn't treat her dad very well. Even during meals, it feels like he's not part of the family. If Mark or I try to sit with him, Nancy gets upset and says he prefers to eat alone. After meals, when I talk to my father-in-law in his room, he tells me he's not happy living there because Nancy causes problems. He says he always eats separately from Nancy's family and gets less food. But Nancy still takes a lot of money from him, even though he only has his pension. Nancy doesn't do his laundry or help with chores much. My father-in-law does most of the cleaning and gardening because Nancy ignores him. Even her husband and kids don't treat him well. When my father-in-law asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the horse race track, he got yelled at. Nancy's son, who's 10, is rude to my father-in-law, saying he smells and should stay in his room. It seems like my father-in-law doesn't remember ever holding his grandson, even though they've lived together since he was born. When my daughter visits, my father-in-law loves spending time with her. He tells her she's his only grandchild, sounding a bit lonely. Hearing this makes me feel sorry for him. Whenever we go to his house, my husband gets upset and tells Nancy to treat their dad better. But Nancy gets angry with my husband, accusing him of trying to take the house away from her. I won't let anyone take this house, my husband insists. It's worrying how much Nancy cares about the house. Then, my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house isn't set up for elderly people, and he tripped over a small step, breaking his right hand. Luckily, he didn't have any other injuries and didn't need to go to the hospital, but it's hard for him to do anything without his right hand. When we visited him, we were shocked to see how weak he'd become. Not only can he not use his right hand, but he can hardly move his feet and clearly needs help. But Nancy's family completely ignores him and doesn't take care of him. He can still manage to get to the bathroom by himself, but eating is really hard for him. My husband confronted my sister-in-law right away. "Why aren't you looking after Dad?" But she didn't seem to understand why he was upset and just laughed it off. A broken hand is no big deal. He can walk by himself, and he's not complaining. It seemed like my father-in-law, used to being ignored, couldn't stand up to my sister-in-law, and she probably knew it. My husband was even more angry. "Isn't it obvious we should take care of our parents?" When he said that, my sister-in-law smirked and said, "You can take care of Dad." I don't want an old man with hardly any money. I was furious at how my sister-in-law could talk about her own father like that. She even said, taking care of a father who only gets a small pension isn't worth it. Her words were so mean that I lost my temper and spoke up. "Fine, we'll take care of him. He won't heal properly if he stays here." My husband agreed, and we decided to take my father-in-law and leave his house right away. While we were packing up my father-in-law's things, my sister-in-law started saying we couldn't have the house just because we were taking care of Dad. She cared more about the house than her own father and didn't have much else to say. My husband brushed off her comments, saying, "Don't worry, I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it." My sister-in-law seemed relieved to hear that. Even as we were getting ready for my father-in-law to move, my sister-in-law and her husband didn't help. Instead, they were mostly interested in checking if there were any valuable items among his belongings. They were probably relying on his pension, but with him leaving, that would stop. They hoped to find something valuable they could sell for cash, but they didn't find anything valuable. When my father-in-law left his house, my sister-in-law and her family didn't bother to say goodbye. They were very cold-hearted. When my father-in-law arrived at our house, he seemed much happier as he played with my daughter. He was like a different person compared to when he was living at his old house. We let him stay in a room that we weren't using, but because the move happened suddenly, we couldn't make any preparations. If we had known earlier, we could have done some renovations, like installing handrails and removing steps. I said to my father-in-law, feeling sorry that we weren't fully prepared, "I'll install the handrails later." To my surprise, my father-in-law also apologized. "I'm sorry for making you worry. I wonder if $200 million will be enough to take care of me and my horses." I couldn't help but laugh. Was my father-in-law making jokes now? He seemed much happier since moving in with us. "Horses?" I chuckled, knowing it was unlikely. "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will probably cost more." I couldn't understand why my father-in-law brought up horses, but his joke seemed way over the top, like something a wealthy person might say. But when I saw his worried face after my response, I started to worry too. He asked, "Does taking care of a person really cost that much?" "All I have left is $200 million. Looking at his serious expression, I realized he wasn't joking earlier. I panicked and tried to explain that my previous comment was just a joke. $200 million is more than enough. It's actually too much. I rushed to my husband to ask about the horses and the $200 million. He was just as confused, but then he remembered something about his grandfather being a landowner. "Remember how I told you my granddad was wealthy? Maybe Dad used to own horses." My husband and I decided to talk to my father-in-law to get the full story. It turned out that he had been owning horses for years, and his trips to the racetrack were actually to check on his own horses, not to bet. He had kept this a secret from his family, so my husband and his sister had no clue about it. Now, with his broken hand and thinking about his future, he worried that if he mentioned owning horses and having $200 million in assets, his daughter and son-in-law might demand it all. He got concerned when I mentioned making home modifications, thinking it might trigger their demands. That's why he decided to tell me about his horse ownership and finances. Understanding the situation, my husband reassured his father, saying, "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses. If you've got $200 million, you should be okay. We'll handle your caregiving expenses, so don't worry about it." His confident words reassured me too. After checking with the person who had always looked after the horses, we made sure there wouldn't be any issues, and we'd put the horse matter to rest. Now that I knew my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I started to see him in a different way. I couldn't help but think that his daughter, who had kicked him out despite his wealth, would regret it once she found out the truth. The idea of her regret brought me some satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. It was busy juggling my part-time job and taking care of him, but my husband helped, and we managed. Having my father-in-law at home brought a new companion for my daughter, and he seemed happier too. His walking had improved since he moved in, and even though we hadn't finished the home modifications yet, he could walk slowly with a cane. Although his broken hand hadn't healed yet, he was practicing eating with his left hand. In his old home, my father-in-law didn't move around much because his nephew would complain whenever he left his room. Even when he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law would seem annoyed. This lack of activity might have contributed to his muscles weakening and his fall. On sunny days, he enjoyed going for walks with my daughter. I had been so focused on my father-in-law's recovery that I hadn't thought much about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after my father-in-law moved in with us, my sister-in-law called in a panic. "Is Dad there? If he is, get him on the phone right away." But at that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I told her that, she got even angrier. "You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us." I was confused by what she said. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs. While it might still be in my father-in-law's name, calling it a rented house didn't add up. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law became even more upset. Some man claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or leave. I was even more confused when she mentioned the landlord of the in-laws' home. Shouldn't it be my father-in-law? Did he go to collect rent for my sister-in-law? Just then, my father-in-law returned, so I quickly explained the situation and had him answer my sister-in-law's call. With a hint of anger in his voice, my father-in-law spoke to the daughter who had driven him out of his own home. "Weren't you told that the house was rented? That house belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I've been paying the rent until you kicked me out." My father-in-law sounded distant, and my sister-in-law, sensing his anger, shouted from the phone, "I haven't heard anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me." About 30 minutes later, my sister-in-law and her husband arrived, looking flushed and surprised to see my father-in-law walking on his own. But there were bigger issues to address as my sister-in-law erupted once more. "I thought the land and house belonged to you, Dad. Did you deceive me?" my sister-in-law's husband asked. "All that aside, can you please pay the rent? If you don't, we'll be kicked out of the house." My father-in-law laughed it off. "Why should I pay rent for a house where I'm not living? After you guys kicked me out, don't you think that's a bit too much to ask?" Unable to respond to my father-in-law's reasonable statement, my brother-in-law fell silent. This time, my sister-in-law began to speak. "Dad, were you planning to make us struggle from the beginning? You seem far more energetic than when you were living with us, even though you pretended to be injured." To address my sister-in-law's strange accusation, I intervened. "That's because he's been doing rehabilitation exercises every day, working on walking, and practicing using his injured hand for eating." My father-in-law chimed in, reinforcing my words. "I actually think being kicked out by you guys was a blessing. Since I came to live with Mark, we all eat together, and I'm never made to feel like a nuisance." Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law and her husband fell silent, their jaws clenching shut. Then, right on cue, my daughter came and unwittingly revealed my father-in-law's true status. "Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next horse race, right?" My father-in-law grinned and replied, "Yes, it'll be in this Sunday's race. Why don't we go watch it together?" My daughter happily dashed off, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the significance of this. They hastily asked my father-in-law, "Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" My father-in-law replied, a smug look on his face, "I stayed silent because I knew if I mentioned money, you'd try to take it. And I know talking about horse racing always makes your husband frown." With that, my father-in-law's previously cheerful demeanor turned serious. His intimidating expression sent shivers down my spine. And as he began to speak slowly, the tension in the room intensified. "I no longer consider someone like you, who disrespects your own father, as my daughter. I knew you only moved in with me for the inheritance." Caught off guard by my father-in-law's stern words, my sister-in-law was visibly stunned. With the final blow, my father-in-law declared, "You won't get a single cent of my inheritance." Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law appeared shocked and stumbled backward. Her husband, who had been trying to support her, looked defeated and left the room. The rent for my father-in-law's house was a hefty sum, and it was impossible for my sister-in-law and her husband to afford it. So inevitably, they had to move out. I had no idea that my parents-in-law's house was rented, and my husband didn't know either. He later confirmed it with his father. After moving out, my sister-in-law, who had been spending money recklessly without worrying about rent, suddenly found herself in a financial crisis. Their spending habits were hard to break, and they started relying on credit cards to make ends meet, which only resulted in mounting debt. I heard that my sister-in-law and her husband, unable to rely on my father-in-law anymore, moved to her husband's parents' house, but I'm not sure what happened after that. Meanwhile, Things have been going well for us since we started living with my father-in-law. My father-in-law, who had previously broken his hand, healed well, and his legs and hips became stronger to the point where he could do everything on his own. He's now so energetic that he goes jogging with my daughter. He's like a completely different person from when we first moved in. Since that incident, my father-in-law has been having discussions with my husband and thinking about the future, even drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I assume he's arranged things so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me happiest was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We still had nearly 20 years of payments left, but I'm grateful that he paid it off ahead of schedule. With the loan fully paid, my father-in-law is considering doing some renovations to our home to make it more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but I don't want him to talk about becoming bedridden. I want him to stay healthy for as long as possible. My sister, who took John away from me, said, "I'll be happy enough for both of us." She sent me an invitation to her wedding with John, trying to make me jealous. But I told Mom, "We'll go anyway. We'll make sure to make it special." Usually my parents are nice and hardly ever get mad, but they'd had enough of my sister's bad behavior. We went to the wedding with determined smiles, but it turned out to be a disaster, not a happy occasion. I'm Hannah Turner, 24 years old, and I draw pictures for a living. I got married recently, not even a year ago, and my relationship with my husband, John, is strong. We met through a friend and quickly started dating. He proposed to me at a restaurant with a beautiful view at night. Our wedding was full of happiness, surrounded by family and friends. One day, I noticed that my husband John forgot his phone in the living room. I picked it up and brought it to him, saying, "John, you forgot your phone." He seemed a bit nervous as he took it, thanking me quickly before rushing out the door. His sudden rush left me feeling uneasy, and that feeling marked the beginning of my suspicions. After that day, John started carrying his phone with him everywhere, even at home. I found it strange, but I couldn't imagine John would cheat on me, right? We'd been getting along fine without any major problems, so I tried to convince myself that everything was okay. However, my trust didn't last long. While I was hanging up laundry, I saw a notification on my own phone. It was an email from an unfamiliar address. "Hey, long time no see. How have you been?" It seemed like it could be from someone I knew, but I heard about scams where people pretend to be friends, so I decided to ignore it. But then another message came through. "Hey, don't ignore me. I can see you read it. Ignoring your sister? That's just like you, always so mean." Right after I closed my phone, it rang, and it was another message from the same unknown sender, calling me their sister. Indeed, I do have a sister named Sally, but she's known for causing trouble in various ways. Sally, my sister, had a history of causing trouble, especially with money. She often borrowed money from friends and then disappeared without paying them back, leaving my parents and me to deal with the fallout. Because she was their daughter, my parents always ended up paying off her debts. On top of that, Sally had a habit of making complaints over the smallest things. She'd yell and be rude, even making people kneel down to apologize to her. This made her a difficult customer to deal with. Another problem was Sally's love life. She had a thing for men who were already in relationships, whether they were friends or family. She didn't care about causing tension between people, she just pursued what she wanted. Because of her behavior, I had cut ties with Sally since she left home, so when I received a message with the word "sister" on my phone, I felt uneasy. I debated whether to respond, but I ultimately decided to ignore it. Whether it was really Sally or someone pretending to be her, I didn't want to get involved. However, the messages kept coming until I finally opened one to block the sender. What I saw shocked me to my core. It was a message from Sally, saying that John was now hers and that I should hurry up and divorce him. There was even a photo of John and Sally together as proof. I didn't need any more confirmation, I knew it was true. I sat down, feeling dizzy with shock and disbelief. After Sally's message, John never came back home. Instead, all I got was a set of divorce papers filled out by him. My attempts to reach John were met with silence. Losing my husband in such a sudden way left me feeling devastated, angry, and emotionally fragile. Why, John? I cried for days. Once I had calmed down a bit, I decided to reach out to Sally. "What do you want? Let me speak to John. You've been ignoring me for so long, and now you contact me without even saying hello or apologizing. What's your intention?" I demanded, Excuse me? You should be the one apologizing. Just send John back home for now. No way. He doesn't want to come back. He says he loves me more than he ever loved you. And why should I apologize? It's your fault for not being able to keep him. No matter what I said, Sally wouldn't listen. I was already feeling terrible mentally, too exhausted to worry or think anymore. I realized it was pointless to keep arguing. Holding on would only make things worse. You know, if you're going to be angry at someone, be angry at your own lack of charm, loser. After that conversation, I shut off my phone. I was done dealing with Sally and had lost all affection for John, who had chosen her. Before I knew it, I had signed the divorce papers, and just like that, my once happy marriage was over. My life became a mess after that. Maybe because of the emotional damage, I struggled to eat and felt more tired than usual. I looked so worn out that my coworkers started to worry. Despite trying to reassure them with a smile, it felt like my body and mind were reaching their limits. Eventually, I collapsed at work and woke up in the emergency room. My parents and a close coworker were there beside me. Hannah. Can you recognize me, Hannah? Their voices brought me back to reality. Looking around, I realized I was in hospital, remembering what had happened. Oh, I collapsed, didn't I? My dad sighed with relief. We were so worried when the hospital called. Are you working too hard? He asked. But deep down, I knew it was the stress from John and Sally. Maybe, I muttered, and my mom quickly called for a nurse to get a doctor. After a checkup, they decided to keep me in the hospital for observation. Are you eating properly? Getting enough rest? My dad bombarded me with questions, clearly worried. I assured him I was okay. My mom asked him to buy some drinks and snacks for me, and he agreed, leaving the room. Hey Hannah, something's not right, is it? Natalie said. You've seemed really tired lately, and this is so unlike you. They say women have strong intuition, and Natalie seemed to have it. I sighed and opened up to them about everything that had been happening. I ended up crying while explaining, realizing I had reached my breaking point without even realizing it. I thought I could handle it all, but it turns out I didn't understand myself as well as I thought. As I tried to laugh it off, my mom squeezed my hand tightly. I had no idea all of this was going on. Why didn't you tell us sooner? This is the first time I'm hearing about the divorce. I'm sorry to say this in front of you, Mom, but is Sally out of her mind? I can't believe it. Both of them expressed their anger towards Sally, and I could tell they were genuinely worried about me. I didn't want to cause trouble or worry anyone, so I tried to downplay the situation. I felt embarrassed, and part of me believed what Sally had said might be true. Maybe it was my fault for not being more appealing. That's nonsense. What are you talking about? It's clear that Sally and your ex are the ones in the wrong here. Natalie is right. You didn't do anything wrong. To think you were suffering all alone, I'm so sorry. Both of them looked like they were on the verge of tears. I regretted not relying on the people around me more. My mom suggested that I come back home for a while considering my mental and physical state, and after the doctor also recommended rest, Natalie took care of the paperwork at work with my medical certificate. When my dad returned with drinks and heard about me resting at home, he immediately agreed that it was a good idea. Natalie managed to explain everything to my workplace, and HR assured me, "You've got plenty of paid time off saved up, so take your time off to rest." After thanking Natalie, she reassured me that she'd be there for me, and I should lean on her whenever I needed. Over the next few days, I stayed at my parents' house. Natalie came to visit occasionally, and I could feel my mind and body gradually recovering. I realized that keeping everything bottled up inside wasn't healthy. Today, as Natalie and I were enjoying cake prepared by my mom, my phone rang, piquing my curiosity. I opened it, and my heart raced. "Hey there, how are you doing? Thought you might be wondering about us, so I decided to reach out." It was Sally, who I hadn't spoken to since the fallout. I regretted letting my guard down and checking my phone. Natalie noticed the change in my expression. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, but it was clear something was off. Natalie asked if she could see my phone. I didn't want to worry her, but I had just realized that bottling things up wasn't good. So, I nodded and handed her my phone. Natalie looked puzzled as she read the message. "What's this? Is she picking a fight? This is Sally, right?" I nodded in response, and Natalie closed the phone. "Just ignore it. Actually, let's block her." No point in dealing with someone like this, she suggested, and I agreed. Opening my phone to block Sally just then, another message from Sally came in. We've been living together smoothly since then, and guess what? I got pregnant. You might be thinking already, but nope. John and I started our relationship 6 months ago. The word pregnant made time stop for me. We had been trying to conceive during our marriage. It would be great if we could be blessed with our baby soon, we used to say. Reading this message hurt deeply. Tears started flowing, and Natalie, seeing me cry, took the phone from my hand. After reading the message, she yelled, "What? I can't believe this. I'm so mad I could explode. We should sue them." Suing was something I had considered when I first received the message, but now, I didn't have the energy or will to pursue it. "I just don't want to deal with this anymore," I muttered, and Natalie calmed down. "Sorry, I got too emotional." "You're right. It's best not to get involved." Natalie's comforting back rub felt so kind, and I cried a bit more. Then my mom came into the living room, having seen what happened. "Hey Hannah, actually, I haven't told your dad about this yet." I understood what that meant. Knowing this would infuriate my dad. But I think it's time we told him. My mom's solemn words struck me deeply. I took a moment to think. I also believe it's time to talk about it. This is just too much, I concluded. Natalie's words convinced me too. So I decided to let my mom talk to him. My mom said she would talk about it, so I decided to leave it to her. After Natalie went home and it got dark, my dad came back from work. He said it smelled good in the house and asked what was for dinner. I welcomed him home, and he seemed happier since I returned. Mom said Dad's mood had improved, and she was glad I was back. Her words made me really happy, knowing I had a place where I felt calm. But today, Mom looked serious when she talked to Dad. She said they needed to discuss something important, and Dad understood, becoming serious too. Then Dad mentioned it was about me, and I could see kindness in his eyes, which almost made me cry. After explaining everything to Dad, he seemed calm but a bit angry. He told me not to block Sally yet, even though I didn't have to read her messages. He must have had his reasons. Mom usually followed Dad's advice in situations like this. Dad also suggested letting Natalie know about it. I understood and agreed. Both Mom and Dad reassured me that everything would be okay and that they were here for me, along with Natalie. Their kind words and smiles made me feel so relieved and happy that I ended up crying. Seeing this, both my parents laughed, and my heart felt warm. That night, I told Natalie everything, and she said, "It's wonderful you have such supportive parents, and remember, you've got me too." I gazed at the stars, feeling comforted. After talking it over more, I decided to move back home. That meant going back to my parents' place since it's close enough to commute to work from there. Natalie thought it would be better for my mental well-being to be away from a house full of painful memories. Since I was the one on the rental contract, I handled canceling it and sent John's stuff to his parents' house. On moving day, I sorted out mail forwarding at the post office and completed the move smoothly. I bid farewell to the landlord with a smile, leaving on good terms. Back at my parents' place, I settled back in and returned to work. My coworkers had been concerned, but now I could genuinely tell them I was okay with a smile. My boss reminded me not to push myself too hard, which made me appreciate my workplace even more. A few months later, I returned home. When I got there, my mom had a serious look on her face. She said we needed to talk and asked me to come to the living room after changing. I sensed something was wrong from her expression. After changing, I went to the living room where my parents sat, looking puzzled over a letter. I sat down in front of them, and they showed me the letter. It was an invitation to a wedding, but what could be the problem with it? I asked if I could see it, and my dad said yes. When I looked at it, I saw it was from Sally and John. I was shocked. What? I couldn't believe it. "You filed a forwarding address because you moved, right?" my dad asked. "Yes, that's right." No wonder both my parents looked worried, but surprisingly, I felt calm. If this had happened before, I would have been really shocked, but now, I just felt disgusted. "Are you okay?" my mom asked, concerned. Dad was also watching me. "Somehow, I'm better than I expected. I just feel disgusted. I wonder how far they want to go to insult me, right? Even if she's my daughter. This is too much for me to handle," I said. I'm glad Hannah isn't as shocked as we thought, but this is still unacceptable. I could see my parents were angry for my sake. I'm grateful for my parents who are standing up for me. The invitation was addressed to me. Do I have to go? I asked, feeling uncertain, and my parents looked at me with determination. Mom and I will go. We'll show them what hell looks like. It was unsettling to see my usually gentle parents so angry. But the invitation is addressed to me, I pointed out. Well, we're the parents of the bride. It would be rude not to attend, right? My dad reasoned. Exactly. It's our daughter's wedding. We're looking forward to it, Mom said with a smile, but her eyes didn't match her expression, making me nervous. Dad brushed off my concerns and kept getting ready. I hope it's okay, he said, ignoring me. I heard a car pulling up, so I went to check if they had called a taxi. But instead, I found Natalie stepping out of a familiar car. Natalie, what are you doing here? I asked in surprise as I opened the door. She looked stunning in her party dress. Good morning. Are your dad and mom ready? She asked, ignoring my question. Wait, am I attending the wedding too? I was shocked by her statement. When my parents came out, I asked them what was going on. It turned out that one of John's relatives was a friend of Natalie's. Upon hearing about the situation, she was invited to attend as his relative's girlfriend. My parents didn't object. In fact, they seemed excited about going together. As I pondered what they were up to, Natalie said, I can't just sit back after what happened to Hannah. You get it, right? Despite feeling anxious, I agreed. Then my parents and Natalie left together for the venue in one car. I thought about joining them, but Natalie seemed to sense my hesitation and said, if you want to see, I can show you through a video call. So I stayed home and trusted them. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I reached out to Natalie for a video call. When they arrived at the venue, my parents and Natalie headed to the reception. Natalie was on the guest list, thanks to John's relatives' arrangement, but my parents weren't listed since they weren't officially invited. The receptionist went to check their names, and that's when Sally showed up. Sally was surprised to see my parents and couldn't hide her confusion. Why are you here? She asked. Well, we're the parents. It's only natural for us to come, my parents replied. There seems to be a mistake. We didn't receive an invitation, they explained, which made Sally force a smile. The invitation was actually meant for Hannah. Yes, we were surprised when Hannah told us about it. We had no idea about the wedding. Since Hannah couldn't make it today due to work, we came instead. It's fine to invite Hannah, but you should have sent one to us too. It wouldn't look good without the bride's parents, right? My dad pointed out, mentioning the lack of invitation twice. Though I couldn't see my parents' expressions through Natalie's video call, I could picture the scene in my mind. Yes, I'm your daughter after all. Of course, you'd be happy. Sally seemed to genuinely believe my parents came for her sake. I thought she was delusional, I muttered to myself. Then John appeared. He turned pale at the sight of my parents. Relax, John. They came to celebrate with us. They must really love me, especially since Hannah is like that. Sally reassured John, who seemed relieved and greeted my parents with a smile. John's parents also joined in, and the atmosphere became friendly and warm. Seeing my former in-laws chatting happily, a memory of being fondly cared for by them stings a bit. I wondered if they were only nice to me because I was their son's wife, which was a bit shocking. Maybe it was indeed the right decision not to go, I murmured. And the scene shifted to the ceremony and then to the reception. At the reception, Sally and John made a happy entrance. Natalie occasionally asked me if I was okay, but surprisingly, I was fine, responding, I'm okay. More than anything, I was worried about my phone's battery, but she reassured me she had a portable charger, well prepared indeed. When it was time to read the letter of gratitude to the parents, Sally started panicking because she hadn't expected her parents to come. Seeing this, my parents asked the MC for the microphone. Today, we weren't actually supposed to come, so it's understandable that Sally wasn't prepared. As a surprise from us to you, we'd like to convey a message to our daughter Sally, my dad announced. The venue erupted in applause. Sally seemed relieved by the save and smirked, clapping exaggeratedly. Dad, I'm so happy. Her exaggerated gratitude was annoying. I kept watching, feeling uneasy. Then my dad did something unbelievable with a smile. Our surprise from us to you is this, he announced, and suddenly the doors of the reception hall opened, revealing several men standing there, all looking outraged. I watched the scene unfold, wondering what would happen next. Sally turned pale at the sight of them. Our Sally is so charming that she has received affection from many men. The kind Sally has responded to all these feelings, making her a pride and joy. And today, These gentlemen wanted to give us a prize, so we brought them here. My dad initiated, leading to the men storming the stage, expressing their anger. Sally tried to escape but was confronted with accusations like, "What do you mean you're marrying someone else? How much do you think I've spent on you? Pay back the money you borrowed." Sally turned pale and was nearly in tears watching this. Natalie coolly commented, "Wow," while I was stunned. John, confronting Sally with the "what's going on," found her too shocked and flustered to respond. Then my mom grabbed the microphone and started talking. "Guess what? We have another surprise. As my husband mentioned earlier, our daughter Sally is really popular, even with other women." When Mom said this, a bunch of women in the crowd stood up. We invited those who wanted to meet Sally. After Mom spoke, the women went over to Sally. Suddenly, someone else grabbed the microphone and shouted, "You stole my man, and now you're trying to act all happy. Give me money for cheating with my husband. You disappeared as soon as I lent you money. Pay me back." Everything got chaotic. The reception room went from noisy to really chaotic. I bet the other guests were shocked, but they seemed more disgusted than surprised. It was scary to see my parents smiling through all this madness, and I realized this was the kind of reputation my sister had. Amidst all the chaos, someone else grabbed the microphone. "Sally, it's really nice to see such a lovely person becoming our son's wife." Surprisingly, it was my ex-mother-in-law who spoke up unexpectedly. I was puzzled, wondering what she meant. She went on, "It might not be as grand as the surprise Sally's parents prepared, but we also have something special for you." John seemed shocked by his mother's words. "What do you mean, Mom? Can't you see what's happening?" But his attempt to calm things down was ignored by my ex-father-in-law, who took hold of the microphone. "First, we want to thank Sally's parents for their thoughtful surprise. I happen to own a business, and we decided to remove John from his expected position as my successor. That's our surprise for you." "What? What's going on?" Sally and John were shocked. I remembered hearing about John being prepared to take over his dad's business during their marriage, so his dad's announcement was surprising. "What are you saying, Dad? You've made your own choices, cheated by your own will, divorced by your own will, and remarried by your own will. Someone who can make such commendable decisions should start your own business rather than take over mine. Don't decide on your own. You said I was the successor." John looked panicked. "We're serious. You're already doing great on your own. Use your judgment to live your life from now on. With Sally by your side," his dad replied. "Exactly, I couldn't be prouder of having a son who can make such independent decisions." I was stunned. My ex-in-laws seemed to be laughing along with my parents, but their eyes didn't match their smiles. They seemed pretty angry. Natalie found the situation amusing. "They deserve it." I can barely keep from laughing. "I'm just speechless," I said, and Natalie caught me up on what had happened while I was away. My ex-in-laws came to apologize. They truly considered me and my parents as part of their family. They had teamed up with my parents to plan this surprise retaliation. Natalie had been keeping in touch with my parents and had also heard the story from John's relatives, so she knew everything. Hearing this brought tears to my eyes, realizing I had so many people supporting me. "You're not alone, Hannah. There are so many people who care about you," Natalie said, trying to hold back her own tears. "How could we stay silent when someone we care about is hurting?" Yeah, I cried, unable to speak properly, just nodding. "Thank you," I managed to say finally. I saw my parents and ex-in-laws smiling kindly at me through the screen. Meanwhile, chaos continued at the venue, with the staff trying to calm down the disastrous situation. Then, a man stood up and made his way toward the stage. He stood in front of John, who then collapsed to his knees. After saying something to John, the man returned to his seat. "Hey, what did that man say?" I couldn't quite make it out from this far away unless he used a microphone. "Maybe I should go ask him directly," Natalie suggested and headed toward the man with her phone. "Excuse me," she said as she approached, and the man turned around. I was surprised. "Uncle?" It was indeed my dad's brother, my uncle. Natalie showed him the screen, and upon seeing me, my uncle looked surprised and very happy. "Hannah, are you okay? I heard about what happened today from your dad. It must have been tough. Thanks for worrying about me, but I'm fine. By the way, what did you say to John just now?" "I told him that since I run this hotel, I'll be seeking compensation for the damages." The reception hall is a mess because of the bride and groom, my uncle explained. Both Natalie and I understood upon hearing his words. That's why John looked so pale. After chatting with my uncle for a while, I felt a bit more hopeful. Trying to spot Sally through the camera was tough because of the crowd surrounding her. This wedding had turned into anything but a celebration. Looking around, I noticed many guests leaving, including some of John's colleagues I recognized who seemed puzzled as they left. I thought to myself, well, that makes sense, feeling somewhat relieved. The wedding ended in disaster, with Sally and John looking worn out and pale by the end. And now, the bride and groom will leave, the MC announced. But by then, most of the guests had already departed, and only our parents, former in-laws, Natalie, and a few of John's relatives were left to applaud. When my parents came back home, I went up to greet them, and to my surprise, Natalie and John's parents were with them. I was a bit shocked but bowed to my former in-laws. I'm sorry for not keeping in touch. I regret how our marriage ended despite your kindness. I apologized, feeling guilty for not reaching out to them after the divorce. My former in-laws, with tears in their eyes, placed their hands on my shoulders. We should be the ones apologizing, they said, but I insisted it wasn't necessary and thanked them for their care during the marriage. After that, we all sat down for tea and had a pleasant chat, expressing gratitude for the wedding events and parting on good terms. I felt like I finally had closure and felt rejuvenated. A few days later, I received a message from Sally on my phone during work. I had forgotten to block her, but when I checked, it was a barrage of complaints. You ruined our wedding. Take responsibility. Did you tell our parents? Are you jealous? Stop blaming me for your unhappiness, loser. Sally's message flashed on my phone. I sighed and turned to Natalie at the next desk. Can I still claim alimony for the affair? She's practically giving me all the evidence herself, right? Fed up with it all, I decided to hire a lawyer to claim alimony. I saved all the messages and images Sally sent and replied to her. Thanks for providing evidence of the affair. A lawyer will be contacting you, so please stop contacting me directly. Sally freaked out. A lawyer? What are you doing? Stop it. She began deleting the messages and images she'd sent. When I told her that I had saved all the evidence, she panicked even more and started apologizing. Sorry, it was all lies. I'll leave Jan alone now that he's not going to be the CEO, and I won't say anything mean anymore. Please don't make me pay alimony, I already have debts. That's not my problem. I don't want Jan, and do whatever you want. Actually, maybe it's good you took him. I don't need a man who cheats. And in the end, you protected me. Thanks, sis, I replied before cutting off contact. After blocking Sally, she tried reaching out from different accounts, but I blocked those too. I quickly consulted with the lawyer I was referred to, and they acted swiftly upon receiving the evidence. Soon after, I started getting messages from John. It seemed things weren't going well with Sally. He sent me creepy messages like a lovesick Romeo, which I ignored and blocked. When he tried to contact me through the house, my parents handled it. Apparently, he got scared off by them and hasn't reached out since. Later, the lawyer informed me that John and Sally had agreed to pay the alimony. They tried to resist using Sally's usual complaint tactics, but that didn't work on a lawyer. Realizing they had no chance, they gave in. John, who was initially resistant, looked defeated and pale after learning Sally had provided plenty of evidence against him. Despite feeling bitter about being harassed by such immature individuals, I'm now just thankful for the many people who stood by me. Sally and John eventually got divorced. Sally, with no one else to turn to, contacted our house once, but my parents issued a statement of estrangement. She hung up the phone crying. John, rumored about the wedding at work, found it uncomfortable and ended up resigning. Unable to go back home, he's now getting by with part-time jobs. Meanwhile, I received a promotion at work because of my excellent performance. I also started a relationship with someone I met in my new department. Thinking ahead, Natalie also clicked with one of John's relatives, and we often share our love stories. Next month, as a celebration, my parents, Natalie, and even my former in-laws are planning a trip to the hot springs together. Despite hitting rock bottom,